So that's the problem that I'm finding when I'm trying to research many of these paths. And I'm starting to revisit and re-question some of the things that I always thought were true. Greetings, my name is Blaze, and welcome to my channel. If you've not been here before, I talk about thought, theory, and my interpretation when it comes to things that I'm interested in. Today's video is actually going to be a rant. So, I've been making videos for quite some time, and I have a good solid group of individuals that love to interact with my videos. However, as the algorithms have changed and my posting has become less frequent, the amount of folks that will watch my videos seems to wax and wane. And I'm okay with that. I realize that. I don't spend a lot of time dedicated to my channel. But I want to revisit the purpose of why I even bother making videos, aside from the fact that I like to hear myself speak. I like to share information. So at the end of the day, when we're learning stuff, and this means anyone out there, we are learning from other sources. Nobody's like instantly knowing how the past works or where things come from. They're taught. Now, people can come up with new ideas, but the core base of what we know or believe we know or think or feel or our moral choices typically are taught to us from a young age. It's part of the culture and society that we grow up in. Quick interjection. This is to say nothing, of course, about personal observations, personal experiences, interpretations, or theorizing on your own. So I, of course, will do videos on all sorts of topics. It can be spirituality. It can be New Age reconstruction stuff, or it can be stuff that's maybe been around for a little while that has been reinterpreted by different cultures. I, of course, like to talk about video games and martial arts and stuff too, but I find that a lot of the folks that like to interact with my videos, and especially the ones that thank me for the information I share, has to do with spirituality, some of the modern movements, which, of course, I'm using the term New Age for. When I started looking, I guess it was back in 1990-something, quick cut just to verify and check. It's been about 28 years. Around 1994, I started looking for different spirituality. And when I started looking, I found myself finding sources that were questionable, but at the time, it's all we had available to us. Back in the 90s, Llewellyn Publications was a huge, huge book publisher to go off of some of these New Age revival reconstruction stuff. And I had my parents telling me stuff like, that is kind of not really what you think it is. My mom once said to me, "Oh, you mean that religion that you basically make up as you go along," when I was researching, I think, Wicca at the time. And I was like, no, Mom, this stuff it's ancient and it's old and it comes from this history. Like people tend to do. They are under the impression that they found this magical book that has been passed down through generations in secret. Well, here's the thing. As time has progressed over these last 28 years, I started to find that there are people trying to either validate or invalidate some of these sources. Then I started questioning, well, where did they originally come from? Who came up with these ideas and what made them so special that they knew this stuff and this information? Then I found that a lot of the books that I was reading, some of the authors basically wrote down their interpretation and kind of pulled and drawled from other traditions to build something new back in the 90s, especially the early 90s. We have some late 1800 stuff, early 1900 stuff that is part of this New Age spiritual movement, and people will repeat it. And they'll repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and everyone just knows in the community that there are certain terminologies, certain practices that are just universally accepted, but what makes them fact or accurate? Well, nothing really. And if you dig into them a little bit further, you'll start finding that they're either a new concept or they're pulled from other traditions. So this got me looking at a lot of different things and questioning a lot of stuff. When I started doing some research into the Scandinavian Norse traditions, that is almost just as bad as some of the quote-unquote witch movements of today, where people were just kind of making up terms or taking old terms and using them however they want. They were creating it as their own way. Then you have these different factions and groups arguing over the proper use of terminology from different languages. They're taking words from different languages and just putting their own spin on them and making a new claim for their practices. So you'll see common practices in some of these groups, and they have no actual historical factual evidence of where they came from. It was a new idea that they threw together, and then people are trying to falsely share this information as fact. I am not all-knowing. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything about everything. What I do know is there's a lot of stuff to research. There's a lot of reasons to get into this stuff. But one of the frustrating pieces when you're searching and researching is where do you start and how do you find what is authentic versus something new and made up. And I don't want to downplay new and made up things. There's nothing wrong with coming up with new ideas. But sharing those new ideas as if they're ancient, I think, is not only a falsehood and an inaccuracy, but it's also very misleading and confusing for individuals that are getting into it. So I have started making videos, and I know that was long-winded, but I started making videos to help folks that are seeking. I have found a couple of answers, and I want to share them with you. I want to help folks that are newly seeking these paths to not have to waste time on the garbly-gook. Back in the day, back in the 90s, we used to call people fluff bunnies who just had just a little bit of data and they kind of walked around like they knew everything. Or they just made up fluff and filler stuff that just had no substance to it. But I also want to give the opportunity to meet other individuals that are also researching these paths so we can share ideas. I don't mind when people call me out on something that might be inaccurate. But if that's the case, I want to have a conversation about it. I want sources. I don't want you to just tell me I'm wrong because you said so or because your tradition practices it a different way. It's fine to share that, but if you're going to try to help me learn, guide me to where you got your sources from, which brings me back to the main point. We learn from other people. Unless we create our own thing, we're taught it. We're taught it through books, we're taught it through videos, or we're taught it through conversations with other people. So with that in mind, I've been very, very into sharing my sources and trying to validate where stuff comes from, where practices come from. I don't want to hear that, well, this word and this practice is ancient and old. I'll give you an example, which is going to piss some people off. People act like reading the rune stones is this ancient Norse thing or an ancient witch thing, or some people actually say Viking witches, or they'll say the Vitki, or they'll say the Volva, and they use these rune stones for divination. Here's the thing. The problem with that is if they use those, and yes, there's some things in the Eddas and Sagas that suggest that they might have done some form of divination, the runes are an alphabet. The actual interpretations of how they're used actually comes from the Norwegian and Icelandic rune poems. And these are more recent. I would have to double check the date. Again, checking notes. And skipping to the part where I verified in my notes. Because again, I take notes on this stuff, and this is what I think I would suggest others to do. The Norwegian rune poem was preserved in the 17th century and was a copy of a destroyed 13th century manuscript. Not to mention, too, that these rune poems are using the Elder Futhark, which is a Proto-Germanic writing system. During the Viking era, they used the Younger Futhark. Finding out facts like that, or when people say that this is witchcraft and nobody can actually define what witchcraft is and everybody seems to have their own version, they kind of use it generically. Witchcraft seems to be any type of magic. So they'll have other practices and other traditions and say, well, that's witchcraft too. Then you muddy the term of what is actual authentic witchcraft. Then if you go back and you start looking, what's the oldest book that you can find on written witchcraft? One of the things that I hear as kind of a cop-out is people will talk about like, oh, witchcraft is ancient and it was passed by word of mouth and it was underground and secretive. Okay, so what was the word of mouth term that you heard it from? How did you find out about it? Did you read it in a book? Okay, who's that author? Why does that author know? How do they have access to the secret knowledge that it's now printed for everyone to read about? Or were you taught by someone? Then there's the question of if it's not written down and authenticated, even if someone taught you witchcraft or your family or a friend, you can only trust that person as the original source. So as far as we know, that's as far back as it goes, because people will interpret and adapt things throughout time based upon their own experiences. People remember some things or they remember things wrong, or they'll put their own twist on it based upon their own life experiences. This happens all the time in anything. So if it's not written down and able to be authenticated, then it loses substance and meaning for trying to claim it as this ancient thing. So that's the problem that I'm finding when I'm trying to research many of these paths. And I'm starting to revisit and re-question some of the things that I always thought were true. I'm trying to find out, like, where would they have originally gotten this from? It turns out a lot of the stuff that people claim is witchcraft today actually ends up being Jewish mysticism. If you look at the Kabbalah practices, if you look at the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a lot of their practices basically translate in what a lot of people think witchcraft is today. So then what is witchcraft, and is it actually Jewish mysticism, or is it actually witchcraft? Like, where is that line? Where does that drawn? Same thing when you talk about some of these North Scandinavian practices. A lot of the things that they're doing, some of their worship and altar and prayer stuff, is basically modern day Christianity with different deities involved with it. They're practicing it like the way they grew up in their own culture, what they thought religion should be like. And again, that's okay if it's new, but don't try to claim it's something old or ancient. And if you're going to throw in new stuff, acknowledge where that stuff comes from. So many people hear something repeated and they just echo it without digging. In summary, in closing, I think I kind of hit my point multiple times. My rant is, I'm not perfect, so don't come at me like I'm trying to claim to be. I am trying to offer you something for free because it's something I have a passion for. If you appreciate it, like and interact. If you think I'm wrong, that's fine. Tell me you think I'm wrong and why, and back it up with sources and evidence. I appreciate the handful of people that still support my channel. It is what it is. It's for you that I still make these videos. And it's also a nice reference for myself if I ever want to go back and look at my ramblings from past years of what I used to think of. Because I will tell you right now, my personal path is my own. I don't like titles. I never have. If you've been watching me for a while, you know this. And I'm always adapting my viewpoint as I learn and discover or rethink or reanalyze things that I used to believe at one time. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.